Today, we're going to kind of make a little bit of a departure. We typically focus on the technology, building technology and how to lower energy usage through those means of heat pumps and solar panels on the roof. And that's what you think of when you think of lowering your energy usage. We wanted to bring food production into that. And as you can see, obviously, there's a lot of new faces here, so there's a lot of interest in that. So Norris Tomlinson is a urban pioneer in food production. He's got quite an ambitious project that I think a lot of us have probably thought about doing in the past, but this is a man who's really taken it on for the last few years. So he's going to be sharing his experiences here. Forgot to mention, my name is Gerard Lester. I'm a volunteer with Solar Oregon, and I've been organizing these meetings for the last year. And I want to make a plug for Solar Oregon. We are a member-driven organization. Solar Oregon does a lot of good at promoting renewable energy around the state, a lot of educational programs, and we really want people to join the organization. We've been around for over 30 years, just over 30 years. And these are some of the people who've been around for a long time with Solar Oregon. Some of our board members are here tonight. So without further ado, Norris Tomlinson.
Hello, thanks for coming out. So 5 years ago, March of 2006, my partner Tulsi and I bought a property in northeast Portland, 0.2 of an acre, and I'll be presenting our design and our goals when we first moved in and kind of report back on what we've achieved of those goals 5 years later. So first slide, we've got a before and after photo. We moved in March of 2006, and so on the left you see the photo of in the summer 2006 when we just sheet mulched things and put in some annual crops before trying to implement the final design. And then 4 years later on the right-hand side. So a quick note about the format tonight. I've given this presentation 2 other times, and both times I almost totally filled 2 hours. So tonight we only have an hour and a half. I'm going to ask you to hold any questions until the end, and I'm going to take about an hour, 10 minutes to give the presentation, and then any questions that you have we'll try to cover in those last 20 minutes. And I can be available afterwards to hang out for a bit. I don't know if we get kicked out of this room, but I can answer questions somewhere else if need be. Here on this slide you see my blog, farmerscrub.blogspot.com. At the blog I've got a lot more detailed information on a lot of what I'll touch on briefly tonight, so definitely check out the blog if you're interested in this kind of thing. So the second slide is the front yard, another before and after. On the left-hand side, this time we have the realty photo on the original flyer, so this is before we even moved in. The previous owner was big into RVs and lawn, so he had his huge driveway and the huge lawn, and 3.5 years later, you can see what we turned it into on the right-hand side. All right, so a little bit about the site. Northeast Portland, very slight slope, not really enough to matter at all. Pretty much full sun. We were definitely looking for full sun access both for growing food and for passive solar for the house. Well-draining soil, not the typical heavy clays of most of Portland. Really lousy soil conditions to begin with. We had a soil test done and had almost no nitrogen in it. There's the figures on how much driveway and lawn. Basically the only useful plants we started with were 2 large seedling cherries on the property line. And yeah, we call this Little Shack on the Prairie. Small house in need of a lot of work. Officially it's 0.2 of an acre. We've taken over the unused parking strip that the city owns. We think it's unlikely that they're ever going to get around to putting sidewalks into our neighborhood. So that added an extra 400 square feet. I've got the breakdown here of how much space the house and garage and structures take up, and how much space the paths take up. And so the end really interesting note here is that of our total, like 9,200 square feet, more or less, we only have about 4,850 square feet of actual usable growing space. So just over half of the site is actually usable for food. We did, last October, we added an eco roof onto the house. We're still very early in the experimentation phases with that, so I don't have a lot to report back on yet. I will say that the garlic, as you can see in this picture, is doing great. And pretty much everything we planted in October has come through the winter fine, but of course the summer drought is the real test. But the eco roofs right now add about 400 more feet of actual growing space. All right, so the first year when we moved in, we were doing the permaculture observation phase. In permaculture, you observe a new site for ideally a full year to see how all 4 seasons interact with the site and watch the wind, the sun, rain patterns, paths that you take, animal interactions, all that kind of stuff. So we knew from the start that we weren't going to start planting any of the permanent plantings yet. So we just started by sheet mulching all the grass away, just putting down cardboard and 12 to 18 inches of wood chips. We did bring in 6 cubic yards of mixed soil so we could get some annual beds growing right away because the soil wasn't very good. So we wanted to do that to be able to have a yield for that first year. We experimented with planting a lot of things, especially squash and tomatoes directly into the wood chips, and strawberries also, and those all did really well. Some other things that went directly into the wood chips didn't do so well. Some artichokes did really well directly in them. And we also tried tomatoes in large pots. The bottom picture there is showing some of those tomatoes because we weren't sure how they would do in the wood chips. That first year we also got chickens and bees and inoculated a bunch of mushroom logs. And we were thinking about and talking about our goals and ideas from the start. So in the top picture, towards the bottom of it, you can see the straight raised beds, which were the soil beds that we bought in. And then further out towards the street was just wood chips and plantings in that. Sunflowers did well directly in the wood chips as well. And then in the backyard, we have little chickens running around. You can kind of see one about smack in the middle of it. And I think we had a lot of squash back there, the tomatoes in pots, and drew some artichokes in the top of that picture. After all the talking, we kind of narrowed down what our site goals were, what we were really trying to achieve here. And basically we were going for self-sufficiency for 2 to 4 people in pretty much everything. So we wanted to be able to feed ourselves a reasonably balanced diet, including a fair amount of protein and fat, not just a lot of carbs, like 5 pounds of potatoes a day. We wanted to be self-sufficient with water, both for domestic use and have enough stored to be able to see us through the summer, irrigating the garden as needed. Heating and cooling needs for the house, cooking fuel, lighting. We wanted to be able to provide for lighting from on-site, not dependent on the electric grid long-term, and handling all of our waste treatment for sewage and gray water on-site. And we wanted the other, so there are kind of 2 prongs to this. One is the self-sufficiency, kind of providing for ourselves, our needs. The other part is the part about providing for others' needs within the community. And so we wanted to be truly sustainable, which means giving back more than we take from the land. And so part of that is not being dependent on civilization after establishment, not creating pollution, which means exported waste, and creating habitat for wildlife, including bees, birds, and insects. So getting a little bit more specific with the site goals. For the garden, we wanted nutritious and diverse abundance. I mentioned the protein crops. We figured we'd focus on nuts, eggs, and some meat production. We wanted peaceful and quiet environment, something that would be really enjoyable to be in and live in. Low maintenance and minimal digging, that was a crucial part of our goals from the start. A lot of permaculture is about minimizing work by working with nature instead of against it. And so definitely the minimal digging helps with that, because every time you disturb the soil, you're creating patches for weeds to exploit, basically creating an open niche. And of course, the act of digging itself is work. And then community-wise, we wanted to be an urban model and be inspirational, hopefully be able to share with people what we learned. And along with the peaceful and quiet, we wanted to be beautiful, alive, and vibrant. Again, a nice place to live in and be in. And this picture here is of some chives, basically chives. The other big project we knew we were going to tackle was the house renovation. We knew that the house needed a fair amount of work, and we also wanted to get it as self-climate controlled and passive solar as possible. So the overall goals were being comfortable without fossil fuels and civilization, welcoming and inviting to live in. We also knew that we probably weren't going to live here forever long term. We'd settled in the neighborhood largely because Tulsi's dad was nearby and he was getting old, and I think we knew at that point already that he had a terminal disease. So we knew that long term we wanted to move to land where we could fully support ourselves in a tight-knit community of maybe 10 to 25 other people. So this wasn't going to be the long-term place. So we wanted the end result to be attractive to buyers for resale and meeting the city code for the work that we did on it. We wanted low maintenance in the house, Largely we focused on mud rooms and an outdoor shower to keep dirty people like me under control. And we wanted to be a model for low-budget, do-it-yourself techniques. We'd gone on a couple of the tour of green homes that are offered in the city, and we were struck by how much of it, about half of the houses, it seemed to us, relied on buying in quote-unquote green products from halfway around the world, like bamboo flooring and all this industrial stuff that didn't really seem green to us and also seemed really expensive. So we wanted to find ways within our other parameters to minimize the cost and make it accessible to the average homeowner. Other parameters, we wanted it to be a comfortable living space for 3 to 4 people. We had a $25,000 to $30,000 budget and mostly do it yourself. We thought a lot about this for years, I would say. We began the actual construction in summer of 2009, and we're on track to be done within a few months. And the picture here is showing our passive solar sun space framing in fall of 2009, shortly before the rains began. And we got it all dried in just in time. All right, so back to the design process for the garden mostly. We cheated a little bit with the permaculture observation phase. We only did 6 months. We had lived the previous 6 months a quarter mile north of that site, and Tulsi had a lot of knowledge of her dad's site a couple miles away. So we kind of fudged it with that. We were definitely basing it on permaculture principles, like every element in the system should be filling multiple functions, and every important function within the system, like water provision, should be served by multiple elements, redundancy, and things like zoning, having the most accessed plants that need our attention the most, and having the chickens in zone 1 where it's easy to access, and then things that you don't need to access as much a little bit further out in zone 2. A lot of the design wound up being forest garden, and we based that on Dave Jackie and Eric Tonesmeyer's Edible Forest Gardens book, which is pretty much the Bible of forest gardening. We created an accurate base map, which wasn't too tricky. We just had the house, property lines, and a couple of seedling cherry trees to draw in. And we cut out tree and shrub circles to scale and moved them around to fit in as many trees and shrubs as we could. Came up with a couple of options, narrowed it down to one. Big piece of the design was leaving enough space between the trees for enough sunlight to get into the understory, to have a diverse understory. If you pack the trees in too closely, then you wind up with a closed canopy and you don't get much diversity. So that was important to us, and we wound up using the space in between trees as our designated path spaces. So once we'd figured out how many trees and shrubs we could get in, we narrowed down our list to the top priorities of what we really wanted to get in, because of course our list was way larger than the yard could actually fit. And then we went around and I planted bamboo poles. So if we had a fig tree in one spot, I put in a 15-foot tall bamboo pole to be able to visualize what it would look like. So we had all these sticks representing the trees and shrubs, and kind of laid out the paths, and we were able to just walk along those and get a feel on the ground for how it would look at maturity. So this picture shows the bamboo poles in the backyard. The elements that we knew we wanted to get into the yard design: food forest, including canopy trees, berries, and the herbaceous understory. Sunny zone 1 garden, where we'd be growing most of our perennial greens, and also things like tomatoes and squash, things that needed full sun. We wanted chickens integrated into the system, not just locked up in a little paddock, small paddock somewhere, but integrated with the whole thing. Bees, the eco roof we added on later. Hangout areas for people, that was pretty important. Material handling zone to be able to receive wood chips and just store bulk materials. And water integration, including rainwater storage and gray water output from the house. We wanted to provide for cooking and heating fuel from on-site, so thinking about some timber trees or ways to coppice trees. And then summer shade for the house and also for the hangout areas. And this picture shows the chickens hanging out under the fuki, which is a Japanese perennial vegetable edible leaf stalk in the backyard. It makes good shelter for them from the sun or from the rain, and they really enjoy scratching around under there. So this shows the design. I won't go into too much details here, but in the front yard, the house is south and the street is north. So from the start, we pretty much knew we were going to put our two large nut trees at the street, where they would shade the street and provide a benefit in the summer instead of shading out growing area. So we wound up putting an English walnut and a chestnut at the street. And then in the backyard design on the right-hand side, the really large circle in the bottom right corner is a black walnut at the southwest corner of the house to provide for the summer shade during the heat of the summer. Then it drops its leaves and allows most of the sun through in the winter. Back to the front yard design, there's the, kind of makes a reverse J of trees that kind of encapsulate the wide open area. That wide open area wound up being our Zone 1 sunny area. We didn't design the exact details of that from the start. We just got the trees figured out. And there's a few other details in the design there, but that's the basic idea. You can see 4 little shrubs down towards the bottom of the front yard design. We deliberately tried to mix up the heights a little bit in the yard, so that instead of having the tall nut trees and then fruit trees and then shrubs and then the herbaceous sunny area, which would just be a single gradient line, we went from the tall trees to some hazelnuts in the understory and then down to the short shrubs and then up again to a layer of persimmons and olives before dropping into the sunny Zone 1. And that just creates more niches for birds and different wildlife, creates more diversity with the structure. In the backyard, so in the backyard, the house is to the north of the picture. So the top line that you see is the sun space window wall that we wanted to have full sun access for. So we designed a little shrub thicket of 6-foot or shorter shrubs that even in the winter time with their bare branches wouldn't cast any shade on the house. And then the taller trees start out far enough that they shouldn't affect the house sun gain at all. Yeah, that's the basics there. And then the chicken coop. Okay, so in the backyard at the top of the photo, at the far south end of the property, we have one of the existing large cherries and also a large evergreen pine tree in the southeast corner of the yard. And then the rest of that property line is taken up by the neighbor's garage, which is 12 feet tall or something like that. So that's a really shady, oftentimes dry, not very productive area. So we designed in our compost pile, wood shed, an existing storage shed, and a chicken coop all against that north-facing wall and line of trees that wouldn't grow many plants anyway. A little more on the food forest. It was definitely the best fit to meet all of our goals for low maintenance, nutritious abundance, diversity, protein crops, and habitat creation. So pretty much from the start, we knew the bulk of the site would encompass food forest. So everything except for the sunny Zone 1 and, of course, the eco roofs we designed as food forest. We had the design for all of this figured out by September of 2006, and we planted some of the woody plants that we already had in pots as soon as we figured it out. And pretty much everything else was in the ground by the spring of 2007. So at this point, everything's been in the ground for 4 full growing seasons. The picture here is of the front yard shot from the roof. And in most of the foreground is actually the Zone 1. The food forest elements are still pretty small in this picture, so it's not a great representative of that. So the food forest canopy, kind of starting from top down, we knew we wanted English walnut, black walnut, and chestnut. We got in 4 filberts, 2 yellow horns, which are kind of an obscure experimental nut crop that haven't turned out to work so well, and a couple of pea shrubs, little leaf pea shrubs, which will provide nitrogen-rich seeds for the chickens. A couple of olive trees, which are experimental and haven't worked out so well either. And for fruits, we put in 3 pawpaws, which are our favorite tasting temperate climate fruit. They taste very tropical, really delicious. A couple of persimmons, 2 Chinese dogwoods, which are both ornamental and have really tasty fruit and very productive and don't have any disease susceptibilities that we've seen. 2 plums, a cherry, a fig, a medlar, which tastes kind of like pre-spiced applesauce and grows in really heavy shade, so it fills a nice niche, and mulberry. For berries, we put in blueberries. Then the next 3 are all in the Elaeagnus genus, so they all fix nitrogen. They're hardy pioneer plants, and they ripen their berries at different times, so they fill different niches, but otherwise have pretty similar uses. Gumi, autumn olive, and silverberry, and the silverberry is evergreen, which is nice. A couple of natives, salal and evergreen huckleberry in some of our shadier areas. Service berries, which are delicious, a lot like blueberries, but I think they taste even better. Darwinian barberry, goji berries or wolfberries, and next two are really shade-tolerant gooseberries and the currants, so we use them pretty heavily as understories in the backyard food forest. Chilean guava, and then the next two are really low-growing berries, lingonberry and kinnick, and we also have low-bush blueberries. All of these we use as understories to trees. And some of the caneberries, raspberries and blackberries, and the related Japanese wineberry. And the bowl here has service berries on the right-hand side and some white mulberries on the left-hand side. Actually, not from our yard. We foraged them from nearby in town. The vine layer, we got in three species of kiwis. These three species all ripen at very different times, and so they really extend the kiwi season. Arctic beauties, and then the hardies come next, and then the fuzzy kiwis can store well into the winter. Put in some passion flowers, which have really beautiful flowers and some medicinal uses, and edible fruit. Grapes, akebia, which is the bottom right picture. Actually, both of the bottom pictures are of akebia. It makes a really interesting perennial vegetable pod. We tried air potato, which didn't work very well, and cinnamon vine, which is related to air potato. The last two are actually yams in the Dioscorea genus, and they both make edible, starchy, potato-like bulbils in the leaf axils above ground, so you can kind of pick potatoes from them. The air potatoes make really big ones, the cinnamon vines make much smaller ones, but the air potatoes aren't very hardy, so cinnamon vines are a much better bet here. The top picture in this slide is of our grape arbor in the front yard. The herbaceous understory. We started off, I designed all these theoretical polycultures on paper, very few of which actually worked out for various reasons, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. A lot of it is because we didn't have any experience with a lot of these perennial plants. They're really unusual and obscure, and it's hard to find them, period. There's a little bit of info in the literature, maybe, but it's going to depend, or the plant growth is going to vary depending on the site conditions and the climate. So it's definitely all learning a lot from scratch on that. For the understories, we were aiming to fill all the kind of main ecosystem functions of nitrogen fixation to provide nitrogen to the rest of the plants in the low gild. Nutrient accumulators, which are the deep tap-rooted plants like yarrow and comfrey that can forage for minerals way down in the subsoil and bring them up to the soil surface. And either if you eat them and pee it back out into the yard, or just cut the leaves and leave it there, or feed it to the chickens, or so on, those nutrients wind up coming up from the subsoil and being available at the soil surface for the other plants in the system. Beneficial insectary plants, mostly the carrot family and some sunflower family plants, and also a few mints, support things like parasitic wasps that help keep insect pests in check. Aromatic pest confusers, basically the alliums, the onion family, and also the mint family, which give off strong odors and make it harder for insects to hone in on the smells of the plant they're trying to find to feed on. Ground covers to keep all the ground covered at all times so that there aren't open, bare soil, open niches for weed seeds to germinate in. And then, of course, the direct yields for us, including food, medicinal uses, fuel, wood, possibly, and fodder for chickens. I will describe a few of the plants in this picture. The tall spike of kind of yellow flowers, it's kind of hard to tell, but the main two spikes coming up are yellow asphodel, really ornamental flowers. The flowers taste really sweet, and it's a root crop that's available in the summertime, which is kind of rare for the low-maintenance perennial roots. And the bottom left of the picture are some chives. Just to the right of them, with kind of the arrow-shaped leaves, are Good King Henry, which is related to quinoa and to lamb's quarters. So it has edible leaves, which are a lot like spinach, and it's perennial, so it's basically our perennial spinach substitute. And it also makes edible seeds like quinoa, again, from a perennial low-maintenance plant. And that's basically what we're looking at in that picture. For the sun garden, the main open zone 1 area, we were planning to have mostly perennial vegetables to meet our needs of low maintenance, building up soil instead of destroying it through digging, creating habitat, and also giving us a lot of nutrition. The perennials with their deeper roots are able to fend better for themselves with water and finding nutrients. And that also means that they often are more nutritious than most annual vegetables, so we get more nutrition out of them. We do have a few things where we haven't really found substitutes for the annual crops, and we still want to have them. So we do still grow tomatoes, melons, and squashes. Those are the main things. We've been trying to grow some fava beans and other beans as well. The sun garden's about 1,000 square feet, including paths. I've been realizing over the last week that it could be a lot smaller than that. There's a lot of lessons learned. It's kind of overkill, at least for the greens part of it. And we'll see the design in the next slide, I think. We went with a circular layout to minimize the amount of path space. If you just have rectangular raised beds, you're using up more wasting more space on paths than you do if you can get more circular into it. And then we used keyhole beds, and I'll show you that concept when we see the design. Top right picture, we've got zebra mallow in the forefront with a really large leaf. Those leaves get as big around as my hand, and they're solid, and they're really mild tasting. They're one of our main lettuce substitutes. We use those pretty heavily in salads and then bulk it out with, or fill it out with other more strongly flavored leaves. In the background, we've got hesperus, which actually isn't very edible for humans, but it's a really good insectivorous plant. I think I see columbine in the back left with dark purple flowers. The flowers are really tasty and ornamental in salads. Bottom picture is Egyptian walking onion, which is a perennial onion that has edible shoots like scallions. The top parts you can just chop and use directly as onions during the right time of the year, and the bulbs are edible but small. Here's the design. On the left-hand side, we have a zoom in of the front yard food forest design that we saw earlier. And then on the right, you see the path system that we that we put onto it. So you can see the circular layout of it. Right in the center there, we've got a keyhole bed. So the idea is that you have a short, small little path that comes midway into it, and then a rounder area where you can sit and easily turn around and maneuver. And between that and the path going around the outside of the bed, you have access to all parts of the bed. Yeah, this is basically what we came up with to minimize the path space and give access to everything. Basically once or twice a day, pretty much all year round, because even in the winter time we have a lot of greens growing. I come out of the house, which is at the top of the picture, and then straight down the path that's going straight in the middle, and then just do a little tour around the whole yard and back around and back up into the house. But like I said earlier, I'm realizing that for greens, I really only need the top 2 beds that you see in this picture. That would be enough to be the main green area. And then during some of the tougher times of the year, like the winter, early spring, then maybe in the summer again when things dry out and they aren't growing leaves as lushly, I'd probably do more of an extended circuit through the rest of the yard to get some of the other greens. But the top 2 beds, about 100 square feet, would probably be adequate. We have a little herb spiral, the smaller circle that's above the large circle in the middle. That's an herb spiral, another permaculture concept of stacking 3-dimensional space and getting all kinds of microclimates out of it. And then the central keyhole bed, we planted asparagus in the little bottom semicircle of it. And so the asparagus was designed to create a small heat and sun trap so we could have tomatoes and basil to the south of it, and it would create a little warm microclimate for them. And then between that and the keyhole path coming in from the top, you get a smiley face, which is just a big bonus. Chickens. We had them since the summer of 2006 when we first moved in. We designed the backyard as their playground, figuring that they would just free range through the whole thing. We wanted them integrated into the food forest, so we figured at least we'd be able to have taller shrubs and trees, and the chickens could eat any of the fallen fruit, both for feed for themselves and also clean up any insect pests in the fruit or trying to overwinter in the ground. We've been feeding them entirely dumpstered food or arrangements with the bakery down the street and the Alberta Co-op to get their leftover food. Mostly we're keeping the chickens for eggs, but we have been eating them either when they get sick or a couple of times a raccoon has killed one and been chased off before it ate them, so we've eaten the hens. Our long-term goal is to feed the hens from entirely on-site because we know that dumpster dive food and this whole industrial food chain is not sustainable. Eventually it's going to break down, and so we don't want any of the elements in the system to be dependent on that. It's not truly sustainable. In this picture, we got our chickens walking on water in the top. In the middle of the winter, our bathtub ponds froze over, and they went right on up there. And there they are eating some dumpstered bread in the bottom. The bees, been keeping them since spring 2006. Each year, pretty much we started off with 2 colonies in the spring. Generally, at least one of them dies each winter. This past winter, 2 of them died off. Each spring, again, we're able to either capture a swarm or one volunteer is moving into the empty box, and so we get it back up to 2 colonies again. We have one Langstroth hive, which is the standard rectangular boxes that you usually see, and one top bar hive, which is a little bit more natural. If we were going to stay here long term, we'd probably experiment with the Warre hive, which seems to be better for this climate, helping them deal with moisture problems better. And we've been getting about 30 pounds of honey a year from dead colonies, which is quite a substantial amount. We have not been harvesting honey from the live colonies. If one ever lives through the winter and seems to be strong enough and have enough extra honey in the spring, once the flowers get going again, then we would harvest from them. But we've generally just been harvesting from the dead ones. And the picture here is Tulsi. She snipped this branch in our neighbor's yard with the bee swarm hanging on it, walked down the ladder, across our yards, up our ladder, and put them into our hive on our roof. So very easy way of doing it. Part of our thinking was on how to have food year-round. It's really easy to be awash in produce in the summertime and then not have much fresh from the garden in the wintertime. So we're trying to figure out how to stagger yields through the whole year. So a big part of it is just eating fresh, whatever is available in season, focusing on that. Planting things, especially the berries and the fruit trees, to stagger those yields out, extend the harvest time for the fruits and berries as long as possible, and prevent having a lot of them coming on all at once and having a glut. Focusing on some of the storable foods, which coincides nicely with our focus on the protein crops, so having a lot of nuts and honey and eggs and other small seeds that can be dried and stored. For some of the fruits and berries and mushrooms during the sunny season, we have the solar dehydrator that you see in the picture on the right, which works really well. And then in the fall, we haven't really done this, but it should be possible to dehydrate some of the fall crops like persimmons, maybe some of the other fruits and berries using the wood stove heat. We've been doing a fair amount of fermentation each late spring, early summer, when everything is going full gangbusters. Tulsi makes a garden scrap kimchi, going around picking the daylily buds and scorzonera buds and some different roots and some of the thicker leaves that will have a good texture still in the ferment. And she puts it all together and makes a really nice ferment that lasts us for the next year. We've been trying to limit the amount of canning we do because it's really energy intensive to boil all that water. We do a little bit, maybe mostly for spaghetti sauce or just tomato sauce, but other than that, not much. We have a root cellar now under the house as part of the whole house project that we've implemented. And then the last thing is just by having small livestock like the chickens and perhaps ducks and rabbits, you have manageable bundles of meat when you do kill one, as opposed to having goats where you then have a feast for the whole neighborhood or have to figure out how to preserve it. Rainwater. We focused on building up the soil quality, both because that helps everything grow and because it holds water. We estimate that by adding the 12 to 18 inches of wood chips initially when we moved in and adding a lot more over the years, that we've added maybe 8 to 9 inches of good solid topsoil. We also removed the asphalt driveway, which changed that into a permeable surface that would hold some water. So we've added maybe 9,000 gallons worth of storage just by doing that, all for free. So that's your cheapest, best place to start. We needed to re-roof the house anyway, so we put on a metal roof. We did the work ourselves and got some bundles of metal that were left over from another customer, so we got them for cheaper. So for $1,700, we were able to do 600 square feet of roof. which is really cheap compared to the bids we got early on for somebody to do it for us. And metal roofs have fewer toxins and pollutants coming off of them, so that's a big plus for going into your garden. The eco roofs will act somewhat as water management, especially this time of year when they dry out in between rains. You're able to hold on to a lot of the rain and use it for the plants up there, so that's a good way another way to store it in soil or pseudo soil. And we plan to have 1 or 2 5,000-gallon water tanks to help us with irrigation through the summer. We use a lot of mulch, both wood chips and also just cutting excess plants and laying them down on the soil to protect the soil from the sun and also from compaction from the rain and being blown away by the wind. But mulching definitely helps conserve water. And focusing on the perennial plants that have the deep root systems that can forage for water and access it a lot better from deep down. The picture up above shows a little cross-section of a hole that I dug to show the richer topsoil that we've built up in the top and more of the original paler soil down below. And then our our metal roof in the bottom picture. Rainwater continued. We actually haven't done a whole lot of the rainwater catchment yet. We do have these 3 tubs set up in the backyard. They are just old bathtubs we got for free, plugged them up with maybe a couple of dollars worth of rubber patches and caulk. And that's about 50 gallons per tub, so about 150 gallons total. And we're also using them for several other functions, growing some food, fish. They act as watering troughs for the bees and the chickens and neighborhood cats and possums. And I'll mention a little bit more later about those. We have a plan for the front porch drain. So this, the backside here that you're seeing in the photo drains about half of the house. And then the front porch drain, catching most of the rest of the house, will fill up 2 50-gallon rain barrels, and then actually it's going to be a 1,500-gallon pond. I'm taking all the scrap pond liner from the Eco Roof projects, and I'm going to caulk them together, and we should be able to make a 6-foot by 18-foot pond, which will hold 1,500 gallons or so. And so that will be filled up by the front drain. And then for the carport and garage roofs, which are separate from the other systems, they could fill up some rain barrels and then just dump into the hedgerow, possibly poking some holes in the drain pipe so that they piss out water all along it and distribute it a little bit more than just dumping in one place. In the initial years, we used a bunch of 5-gallon buckets, like 10 or 15 buckets clustered around the downspout, which worked. During the swing season, when you have watering needs in the garden, but it's still raining often enough, we were definitely able to empty the buckets out and then refill them as long as we were around during a decent rainstorm. But obviously it's a lot more work, very inconvenient, takes up a lot of space. All the buckets wind up breeding mosquitoes, whereas with these other ponds you just have one source of water to get fish into to keep the mosquitoes from breeding. So it works, but it's not the best solution by any means. Gray water, we are running them in the foreground of this picture where all the rocks are. That's a buried hot tub, again, free off of Craigslist. And the water goes through that, and we have some weeds and rushes and cattails growing in it that help cleanse the water out. Then it overflows into the bathtub that you see in the background of the photo. And at that point, it should be clean enough to use to irrigate the garden. We think maybe about 50% gets lost to the edges of the first treatment pond and also just evapotranspirated by the plants in it. And then about half of it probably gets into the bathtub. And then in the backyard, we have the washing machine in the garage, and we just poked a hole through the side of that there and let the pump on the washing machine pump the water very slightly uphill. And we get about 30 gallons a week going into the backyard, into that shrub thicket that we saw earlier. So aquaculture, here are the ponds. We wanted to keep it simple. We didn't want to be dealing with pumps or filtration things or greenhouses or any of that. So we're not really trying to grow tilapia or the main aquaculture fish. Mostly we're focusing on wapato as a native root crop, staple food for Native Americans in the area, cattails, a few others. In the picture you can see duckweed, which is an aquatic floating plant. Chickens eat it a little bit, but mostly ducks love it, hence the name. So we've been throwing that to the neighbors' ducks a lot. And azolla is a nitrogen-fixing floating plant that the chickens do enjoy eating. And then fish, we've just been putting in gambusia and goldfish to keep mosquitoes down. And on the bottom picture, you can see our big goldfish harvest. They actually just went belly up a couple of months I had them in a really small, like 5-gallon or maybe 10-gallon wash tub, and when the hard freezes came, they didn't survive it. So I ate them, fried them up. They tasted like oil, and they were just crunch, and that was about it. For fuel wood, this is very vague at this point. Partly because with the house project, we've had one room entirely gutted for the last 2 winters, so it's been bleeding heat like crazy, and we only got it closed up a few weeks ago. So we don't know how much heat we really need for the house with all this insulation finally in place. But the plan would be to have a number of different trees as coppice, meaning that you can cut them down and then they'll resprout and regrow, and so every 5, 7, 10 years, whatever, you can cut out a large amount and set up a system where every year you're able to cut a portion of the yard and have rotating coppicing going on. So we have black locusts that were already existing, and they sucker throughout the yard really readily, so it's pretty easy to come up with more of them. Dense firewood, great building material for poles. They're rot resistant, so you can put them directly in the ground. They'll last for decades if they're thick enough to begin with. Eleagnus, the Gumi, autumn olive, silverberry trio I mentioned earlier, are good dense firewood and coppice well. They don't really make a lot of wood, but it's a byproduct from the berry production. Hazelnuts and chestnuts and mulberries, with all of those, you're going to have a trade-off between fruit and nut production versus fuel production. So I'll have to figure that out long-term, what makes sense. And I planted some paulownia as a fodder crop for chickens and potentially ducks and rabbits in the future. And paulownia is also good coppiceable, usable for firewood. And with the fruit trees, we're going to have woody prunings anyway of small twigs. And if we have a rocket stove for cooking, then that would work really well for that. In the top picture here, we see Tulsi making a goofy little face in front of an autumn olive at One Green World. So they can get quite large and have some decent wood on them. And then the bottom picture shows our black locust trees that already existed in the hedgerow. They get a good 20 to 30 feet tall and make a very decent sized amount of wood very quickly. For hot water for the house, I'm really excited about this. I wish we were staying around long enough to implement it. I don't know whether it'll work fully as designed, but it's worth a try. So we got 5 of those 4-foot by 8-foot solar water panels from the rebuilding center for pretty cheap. So it's 160 square feet total. In this climate, 1 or maybe 2 panels is plenty to provide the hot water for a house, the domestic hot water, for probably an entire year. So it's possible that in the winter time there'll be enough excess hot water to use it for partially heating the house. So our plan was to put these 5 panels up on the roof where we have pretty much full sun access. Use a solar pump so that when the sun is out and the water is getting hot, the solar pump turns on and pumps the water into a box that we could build out of plywood and pond liner and insulate it and have it under the house in the crawl space as deep down as we can get it. So that would be the only active pump required to move the water from the roof down below. And then it would be a drain back system, so then in the winter time when things are frozen, the water will just drain into the down below and you don't have to manage it. And then the idea would be that the city water would be coming through a coil embedded within that hot water tank, and 300 foot of 1-inch PEX I think holds 7 or 9 gallons worth of water. So that's basically a 7-gallon hot water heater right there, which is enough to, 12 gallons of storage. So it's a 12-gallon hot water tank, and that's enough for a reasonable quick shower. And from the numbers that I've seen online of a few other people who are experimenting with this, even after you've exhausted that first 12 gallons, the water's still heating up pretty fast, even as it's flowing through the pipe. So you get more usable water than just that initial 12. And this is the exciting part that I don't know whether it'll work, but we're hoping that the thermosiphon effect will kick in, where the hot water wants to rise and then colder water elsewhere in the system wants to fall. So the idea is that by having this box as far below the floor of our house as we can, it gives a good strong head, I think we call it, good pressure of that hot water wanting to rise out of the box into the radiant floor tubing under the house, and then as it cools down at the far end, it'll fall back down into the tank. And then you can just control it with a couple of simple on-off valves to allow the water to flow through or not, and possibly, depending on how far open you have the valve, it'll slow down the relative speed of flow through it. And if that doesn't work, somebody can always throw on an electric pump and figure out how to power the pump. Last option would be for the wood stove to heat water. We've definitely heated lots of water just by putting it in a pan on top of the wood stove and using it for doing dishes, that kind of thing, or for tea water. And if somebody wanted to, they could coil water around the wood stove pipe, but then you definitely have to pay attention to the danger of, you have to have a relief valve so it doesn't overheat and explode, and you also need a pump to move it through. House heating. So the main heating system here is our passive solar sun space, which Steve and Catherine helped us design. So there's a thermal mass, and we did the Cachadorian system with the concrete blocks on edge underneath the floor so that they form north-south running air channels. So again, we're trying to take advantage of the thermosiphon system where the air closest to the windows, which heats up the most, and it's also closest to the wood stove. So that air is going to want to rise, and then the cooler air at the north side of the room wants to fall. And then there are little register vents. You can see the one register vent in this picture on the left. So that allows the air to get into the floor system underneath, and it helps distribute the heat more evenly throughout the whole floor. And then we also have a natural system with the rest of the house, which is more by accident than design. But the north side of the house, the main original house, is now 2 feet taller than the sun space. So the hot air from the sun space definitely rises into the rest of the house, and we can feel some of the cold air, water falling back down over the ledge into the sun space. So again, that helps passively distribute it throughout the house. Those bathtubs we saw earlier are positioned about 5 feet to the south of this window wall of the sun space. So in the wintertime with the low-angled sun, it reflects extra heat and light into the sun space. And in the summer with the higher-angled sun, it misses the windows so that we don't get heat gain when we don't want it. We are minimizing any of the winter tree shade, as I mentioned earlier. We have a wood stove that you see on the right. It's EPA certified. It's reasonably efficient, but really it should be a rocket stove. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get a rocket stove through the permitting process. Erica and Ernie Weisner have, I think, done it now with one test system, but they were definitely pioneering it and knew that it was going to be a huge hassle, and it was. So if we were living here long term, we would just put in a rocket stove. We will suggest that to whoever buys the house. And the benefit of a rocket stove is that it's way, way more efficient. We have insulated, added a lot of insulation throughout the house. We've got an average of R30 all around. With the original house walls, we only had 2x4s to work with, so we put in polyisocyanurate rigid foam insulation with the R6.5 per inch, so we were able to get those to about R20. And the floors, we mostly had 2x6 joists to work with, and we wanted to put in the radiant heat tubing. So we, again, went with the polyiso, and we were able to get about 4 inches in, 6 inches in some places. So on average, the floors are about R30, and then the attic we were able to do about R40. So house-wide, it averages about R30. We have not insulated the windows. That's a big important step for the long-term system. Especially in the sun space, we went with totally clear glass with no treatments on it so that we could maximize the solar gain, but it also means that we lose a lot of the heat out overnight. So our plan was to build probably sliding curtains that would cover 2 of them. So one of them would cover 4 of the windows coming up to the wood stove, and the other one would cover the 3 windows on the other side coming up to the wood stove. So that's something that the future owners should definitely do to maximize the efficiency of the whole house heating. For cooling, we mostly went with the summer shade, winter sun concept with vegetation. We planted the black walnut at the southwest corner. This photo here is of a neighbor's black walnut. You can see that it gets quite tall. I think that's a good 50, 60 feet tall. There were already black locusts on the east side of the house, and the nice thing with both the locusts and the walnuts, both English and black walnuts, is that they seem to come into leaf really late in the spring. Like only now are they really leafing out heavily. So it's right at consistently each year, it's right at the transition point where we're going from the chillier spring to the warm summer or late spring when we don't need the heat gain anymore. And they also drop their leaves really early in the fall, again, pretty close to the time when they would be ideal. And we've got grapes on the south trellis that's attached to the house above those window wall of the sun space. And the grapes drop their leaves usually a little bit later than is ideal, so maybe it would be good to do some pruning of the leaves, or maybe that won't be necessary. We'll see. And we tried to choose grape varieties that drop their leaves earlier. My hypothesis at this point, based on a couple of varieties I've seen, is that the earliest ripening grapes also drop their leaves earlier. I don't know for sure whether that's true, but 2 of the ones we planted do follow that pattern. We went for cross ventilation as much as possible. Whenever we were redesigning windows or with the sun space that we built, we tried to get in cross ventilation to get air movement in the summer. Sun space thermal mass will also act as cooling for the like opening up the house overnight so that it gets really cool, and then it'll hold that well into the day in the summertime. And the water pipes that were running under the floor through the rest of the house, in the summertime, we now have a valve so you can run any cold water that's going to any taps or to the garden hose is going to run under the floor of the house first. So that'll be 55-degree water coming in from the city. That'll help cool the house down a little bit. House lighting. So the sun space is our biggest source of natural light, and then we have windows in most of the other rooms except for the bathroom. So in the bathroom, we plan to put in a wavy glass window that gives pretty good privacy. You can't see directly through it, but it lets a lot of light in. And then you can have a curtain on the bathroom side for extra privacy as needed. Our long-term plan would be to mostly live with the sun, go to bed with the sun, wake up with the sun, although in the winter time that gets kind of long. We definitely are not opposed, and we've used headlamps a lot with the solar battery charger, but again, in the winter time when there isn't any sun, that's not going to get you very far. We considered those little light tubes that you install, and they go up through the ceiling, bring a lot of light down. They're nice, but at $100, it takes like 30 or 40 years or something to pay them off if you're running a light for 8 hours a day, which we don't do anyway. So the cost trade-off isn't very good. Obviously, eventually, or soon, power is going to get more and more expensive on an ongoing basis, so the time to pay back improves, but still, it's really expensive. So we just went with fixed windows in the walls for the most part, which we got mostly free or cheap off of Craigslist and other sources. Mistakes, problems, and adjustments. This is the more interesting part. On the left, we see an example of the previous owner's electrical work, making this connection just in the middle of the wall. We told him he could not worry about closing up the wall, and we'd deal with all that after he left. Then on the right is our favorite one. When we were renovating this bedroom, we took off a board, and we discovered this chimney on a bookshelf. This is 3/4-inch shelving sitting on top of 1/2-inch or 3/4-inch those horizontal strips, and it's supporting 1/2 ton of bricks. Yeah, so that came down as soon as we found it. Some of our mistakes. One of my biggest ones was with the chickens. Sheet mulching all the grass to death when we first moved in, left them with not very much food to eat, and we had a really hard time reestablishing the herbaceous understory. And so I've now kind of retrofitted a rotating paddock system, and now I have a chance to establish ground cover because they're not having access to all parts of the yard at all times. So now they're in one paddock for a week, the next one for a week, and the third one for a week before they get back to the first one. So each area has a couple of weeks between chicken assaults to recover. That's helping a lot. I wish we had implemented ducts because, as you see in the problem side, slugs have been our main challenge in the yard, and ducks actively eat slugs. I didn't do a good job of designing in a nursery area for starting plants. Didn't design a secure material handling zone. We just have a large area at the street for wood chips, but we don't have anywhere safe for storing large amounts of lumber during the construction project or large amounts of plants and so on. So that was something I just didn't think about. We had trouble with pawpaws, which are a taprooted tree. I planted them in the former driveway, and they were hating the compacted soil. We realized that you don't actually need nitrogen fixers in a yard of this size if you're recycling all of your urine back into the yard, because you're going to provide all the nitrogen and all the other nutrients really that you need. Some mistakes with combining garlic, which you're not supposed to water pretty much ever. You just let it dry down with the summer drought. Planting that with plants that did need water, and so that was a problem for those. And we assumed, based on our experience at other sites in the neighborhood, that we would have the same cold east-winter wind that we'd experienced elsewhere. That's part of the whole fudging and only doing 6 months of observation. Turns out that we don't have that wind were already protected elsewhere. So that led to some challenges with design phase out of the old hedge and phasing in the new one. We didn't do a good job of keeping our mushroom logs moist in the first year. We've had some polyculture problems. We planted stinging nettles along with the gooseberries and currants, and the nettles make it a huge pain in the ass to deal with any of it. So in retrospect, the nettles should be their own little clump that you can easily just hack down from the side as needed. Raspberries have been hit probably with root rot. I had nursery pots in the area because of the poor not having a nursery design from the start, and the nursery pots needed to be watered every day, so I had an overhead sprinkler going for the summer, and that probably made the raspberry roots way too moist and killed them off. Had some trouble establishing the kiwis. The olives have totally died, probably not from cold hardiness problems, but probably from winter wet with the roots, even though our soil drains well. That is my suspicion is the problem. Yellowhorns haven't done well. I think they need more heat and sun than we gave them. They would do better against the south wall, probably. Chilean guavas, although they're my favorite tasting berry for this climate, they're delicious. They need a little bit of protection when we have our cold freezes down into the mid to low teens. And I consistently did not give that to them, and so I killed off 2 rounds of them. Salal and evergreen huckleberries as native plants I figured would be plenty drought tolerant, but they actually were not very happy with not getting water after I watered them the first couple of summers to get them going, but they needed more than that even in subsequent years. Path maintenance has been a challenge. We have been trying to establish ground covers to have vegetative paths, but they don't do very well. It's a tough environment. So we keep having to put down wood chips again because it just turns into a muddy mess, and the wood chips smother whatever last vestige of ground cover we were trying to get going, and we've just been caught in that cycle. Lack of security in that if this place does grow enough food for 2 people and the rest of the city is starving, that's not going to do us much good. But we weren't planning for the arsenal of guns to shoot at the rest of the city, so that's not a design flaw, just an inherent aspect of this project. And we've been kind of lonely for community, for other people seriously into this full-on level of self-sufficiency and true sustainability. Some adjustments. We realized that storing enough water to see us through the summer would require a lot of space with the tanks. It would displace 2 large shrubs or small trees, and it's not very economical. I've got a detailed post of this on my blog, but basically it makes sense to pay for storage for about 400 gallons per 1,000 square feet of roof catchment area, and after that it doesn't make economic sense. Due to our 1-story house and flat site, it would be difficult to get 100% gravity feed to everything anyway. So it basically makes sense to rely on the Bull Run watershed and the reservoir system that we have going here as a giant gravity-fed system in the first place. Basically, if our site has enough water to see it through the summer, but the rest of the city's water system is broken down, everything's in wild chaos anyway, and so it really doesn't matter. So that's what we concluded. A couple minor adjustments with the outdoor kitchen, house expansion. When we did the sun space, it came out a little bit further. Some minor shrub changes based on things dying or just availability of plants. Shoehorned in bamboo that we had in pots and hadn't really designed in very well. Works okay, but it's not great. We actually wound up relying even less on annual crops than we originally expected, which has been nice. We keep experimenting with herbaceous perennials, so I'm still starting, well, at least over the last couple of years, I've still been doing new perennials from seed and trying them out, and especially shuffling things around as I get a feel for them and finding out what plants might actually work together. And the big adjustments with the food balance of how many greens we grow, of which we've had way too many in past years, not enough roots and other calorie crops, and figuring out that we need a few more berries, but we're pretty good on fruit, that kind of things. Our results. We are not using fossil fuels at all for heat, but most of the wood is coming in from off-site. It's free from like scrap piles from construction sites and that kind of stuff, but it's not coming from on-site at this point. We barely use any natural gas. Rocket stove, if we got that set up in an outdoor kitchen, would eliminate the need for natural gas. We don't use the sewer at all. We've been using a human-or bucket system for years. All the gray water is going out into the filtration system, so we don't need the sewer connection, period, except to keep the city inspector happy and the resale people happy. The garden goes at least till June without needing any city imported water. Last year we went into late June because we had the really wet spring in general, and I think we might be on track for that this season as well. Yeah, this is the exciting part. We've been weighing everything that we've harvested for the past year and found that we've been getting 675 calories per day. This is between the two of us. This is not each. So this is enough to feed a third of me or about a little less than half of Tulsi. So it's not nearly as much as we had hoped. But the good news is it only takes us about 40 minutes of maintenance and harvest. So most of our time is spent going out each day and picking greens for the salad. It takes us, I think, like 6 minutes a day to take care of the chickens, including getting their food from down the street. And as the fruit and nut trees begin bearing, the time scaling should work well. We'll get more calories and not spend much more time because we're mostly just harvesting them. If we add ducks in to get the slugs down, it'll be another really low maintenance, high efficient calorie source. Right now, about half of the calories for our animal products are coming in from off-site, just as a rough estimate of the amount of bread and other co-op produce scraps that we're bringing in for the chickens. And also our bees are foraging from off-site. So about a quarter of the total calories that you see there, so maybe 175 of the calories are coming in from off-site, and 500 of them are coming from on-site. And again, with the long-term plan of making it so that the chickens would be fed from on-site. We've been really successful with meeting the needs of others. Every year we're seeing more species and more individuals and new species that we've never seen before of insects and spiders and soil critters. We're seeing more bird activity and different species coming in, spending more time. Definitely more worms and richer soil, and more trees and woody growth sequestering carbon. And I think we've been really successful as an educational model. We've offered lots of free tours and classes, and we've had probably hundreds of people come through at this point and hopefully learn and be inspired by it. And we've been a source of seeds and plants that are hard to find for other people. This picture is showing a butterfly, I'm not sure what kind, on the zebra mallow. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but these are our breakdown of the food harvest calories. Basically, half of our calories are coming from animal products, another quarter from root crops, and a large chunk of that has been from Jerusalem artichokes and garlic. We'll see a detailed slide on that. Greens are 10%, and we're eating at full capacity of greens, pretty much. We couldn't really eat more than we are. So if we expanded this to be more calories to feed a full person, the proportion of the greens would drop. We'd like to see the fruit and berries, which are small now, they'll expand more as the yields come on. Seeds are a really small portion, and I'd like to see that expand a lot. I'm realizing that's a big hole in our system of the calorie-dense seeds that can store. And then flowers and buds and other things like mushrooms and stalks are a small portion. So this is about what I would like the target to look like, about a third of the calories from animal products, 20% from fruit and berries combined, 5% from greens, nuts and seeds a quarter, roots being about 12%, and then the greens and mushrooms and squash all providing a small amount. On the harvest, we're definitely meeting our needs for greens and other vegetables. We have a number of perennial leaf crops like stalks and shoots that give us some variety from just having salads and cooking greens, but the leaf crops are mostly our staple for for vegetables. We have a lot of roots in the wintertime. That's been pretty easy to build up. Summertime and late spring, perennial roots are pretty scarce. I have some plans for adjusting that. Berries we're close with. Honey we're doing well with. In the future, if more people are trying to keep bees, then we'll run into a limit of how many bees can be kept. And also, I want to say this, I think this is an important point. As people feel the need to grow more food, I'm afraid that there's going to be this tendency to cut down a lot of trees and also wipe out a lot of current ornamental plantings, which happen to provide a lot of flowers for bees. And I think people are largely going to go with annual vegetables because that's what they're used to. And most of the annuals, you don't wind up with many flowers unless you're deliberately letting them go to seed. So I'm afraid that there might be kind of a shortage of flowers in the future, and that's a big part of why I'm really trying to push this perennial vegetable gardening. I think it's better for habitat creation and also just for people because it's so much easier. But it's also really important because it supports so many more insects via the flowers than other types of gardens do. We're meeting our needs with eggs, although in the winter we're kind of short on them, but mostly meeting that. So mostly what we have to import at this point is meat, milk, different fats like vegetable oils, olive oil, butter and bear fat. We're importing some eggs in the wintertime, and we're foraging our fruits and nuts at this point, but that will be covered as those come into bearing in our yard. But note that all the stuff we're importing is really calorie-dense stuff. And the pictures here, the left-hand side, mashua is in the bowl, it's a perennial root, and oca on the left-hand side, another perennial root. Then the right-hand side is kind of one of our typical summertime cooking mixes, which relies pretty heavily on flowers. There's a lot of them at that time, and then also some leaves. So very colorful and pretty in the summertime. Here's a chart of greens harvest by month. We got lots in the spring, dwindles down in the summertime as it gets dry, picks up a little bit in the fall when it gets wet again, falls off a cliff with a hard freeze. There's still a lot of greens available in the winter, but they take a long time to harvest, and it's cold and wet and miserable, and the leaves are dirty because they're close to the ground, and it's not much fun to deal with. And those numbers are affected by our immersion in the house project. Most of our animal products are coming from eggs, a fair amount from honey, and a little bit eating chickens. Yeah. Pretty inconsequential, but they're there, some squirrels and rats. Roots have mostly come from Jerusalem artichokes. I was eating a pound a day over the winter, which is a bit more than I would like to eat long term. But they're super easy to grow, super productive. Garlic is another big chunk of it, and we want to expand that a little bit more. It's a great calorie crop for this climate, grows really well. And potatoes, and then some of the perennial roots, skewered and mashua, and yacon and oca are the ones that I'm focusing on expanding production of. Then dandelions are great during the summertime. Root harvest by month, mostly in the winter time. We have the big spike in August because of the garlic harvest. And potatoes are another big part of the summer harvest. So we're expanding that because it fills the needed niche in the summertime as a easy to digest, easy to grow root crop. There's the garden scrap kimchi. We're having pretty good success with the food preservation. We're still using a freezer mostly to buy bulk meat purchases to get a discount on that. For me, the fridge is where food goes to die. I just forget about it in there. I hardly use the fridge. Tulsi uses it a bit more. I could do without it, no problem. It'd be easier to do this with more people in the community to eat the perishables more quickly. We went through way more wood than would possibly be sustainable on this size lot, but again, the house was not insulated at all, so it should help a lot. Getting it insulated, using rocket stoves, using hay boxes for some of the cooking. Ongoing challenges will be that cooking Jerusalem artichokes to make them fully digestible uses a lot of wood, and drying laundry also eats a lot of wood. It helps a lot to acclimatize your body to the colder temperatures. This chicken here drops all of her feathers every winter when it gets really cold. It's kind of a freakish thing. Most chickens drop some of their feathers but retain enough to stay warm. She does not, so don't be like her. Lighting hasn't worked so well in the wintertime. When the sun is out, it's great, but on the dreary winter days, sun space is good, but further into the house, we're not even getting as much sun in as we'd wanted. Here are the results, a little bit depressing. Left-hand side, we can feed 1/3 of a person, not 2 to 4 people. Gave up on the water self-sufficiency. We're not there with heating. We are there with cooling the house. We don't really need fossil fuels for that. Not there with cooking. We're still addicted to the gas because we haven't worked out the rocket stove yet. Close with the lighting. If we made some more lifestyle adjustments, we could pretty much be there. We're pretty good there with the waste treatment, although we're definitely generating garbage from the house construction project and from packaging from food that we're buying. We are giving back to the land more than we take, I think. We're not there with being independent of civilization. We're definitely creating good habitat and supporting a lot of wildlife. The left-hand side here we have camassia flowers, ornamental, beautiful flower, and a staple food crop for Native Americans in this area in the past. On the right-hand side we have lupins, which have an edible seed, although my experiment with it suggested they're not very suitable for humans, better as a chicken crop for various reasons. So in the future, I think we can maybe feed one person from this yard truly sustainably if everything was really firing. Yeah, that's a little bit optimistic, but I think potentially doable. And again, that's including a certain amount of meat, like maybe 20% of calories from meat, 20% from eggs. So it would be more doable if you cut some of those percentages down some, but on the other hand, that's going to increase the amount of work that's required because animals are super efficient collectors of diverse materials and bringing them into a convenient to harvest package for you. We could probably meet heating and cooking needs all right. It's going to depend largely on how willing you are to live with cooler temperature, like in the 50s over the winter. But I think it's pretty much doable between the passive solar and getting some fuel wood from on site that you could make it comfortable enough. Everything except water self-sufficiency you could probably hit for one person. Future yields, that's what I'm expecting in the future. I've got Tulsi standing next to a persimmon tree at One Green World. They're super productive. That branch has fallen down with the productivity. Big future development that would be important for our vision would be meat. We designed the front porch to be able to house ducks underneath it, and then they could free range in the front yard to eat the slugs. Rabbits are a big possibility. I found the cutest picture I could find to show the rabbits that we would eat. I could probably tuck them onto the garage roof so they wouldn't take up any space on the ground and have them as a communal colony. I hate the idea of having one rabbit per cage in these little prison systems. And discovered that they can actually eat black locust leaves, which is a really helpful match for this site. And we could also feed them some alfalfa, comfrey, and paulownia from on site. Possibility of trapping and shooting more squirrels, although as the city gets more food hungry, that's going to dry up pretty fast. And definitely expanding chicken fodders. Big piece to expand further are the seed crops. If we were living here, I would order a batch of Ecos Tree Crops dwarf oaks, which for them get about 4 to 10 feet tall and wide. And they have variable productivity. So we would overplant them to begin with and then thin them down. If some got too big for the spot we wanted, we'd cut them out in the future, and the ones that were least productive, we'd thin out. So that would be a great source of carbs and fats for both humans and poultry. Acorns are a great crop. We've been foraging them from parks around town, but again, in the future, if we really want to be sustainable from on-site, then that would be a helpful plant. Fennel seed has been really good. We can grow more of that. Good King Henry, the quinoa relative, has a lot of potential. And then there's still some other perennial seed crops that have potential that we would be trying to experiment with if we were staying here for ourselves or for the poultry. And if we got slugs under control, we could have a lot more success with the favas and peas and runner beans, which right now the slugs mostly eat before they have a chance to do anything. Some adjustment of the seasonal balance of root crops by trying to get cinnamon vine bulbills, those air potato relatives I mentioned earlier, then yellow asphodels and more summer potatoes for the summer roots. And then diversifying some of the winter crops, so not having so many Jerusalem artichokes. Then I have some polyculture ideas of root crops that can fit together and I think maximize production in a small area. And then there's potential to grow some of these for our chickens to keep them fed without having to import the off-site feed. The top picture is of mashua again, and the bottom picture of this is skirret. The skirret is my favorite perennial root crop because it's really easy and really tasty and relatively productive. So implications for the city: if you take our optimistic one person being fed and fueling one house from our lot size, then Portland can support a little bit less than half of the people here now. So everyone would need to do what we're doing, but do a better job of it, and still kick out half the population. So our conclusion for ourselves is let's move to Hawaii, where there's no need to heat or cool, don't even need clothes, and we can fill our shorts with wild avocados instead.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. All right, so I can take questions.
So don't the chickens eat a lot of the stuff we plant?
Yeah, that's why the backyard has been so hard to reestablish ground cover. So we got the front yard where we have all our productive greens going just fine, but in the backyard they thresh everything at the ground layer. So the paddocks, where now areas have 2 weeks to recover, and I'm still using little wired cages while establishing things to keep them out of those plants initially. That's working really well. And I've gotten a lot of sod off of Craigslist for free, some of it delivered, which is nice. So I'm just laying that out to reestablish grass, which they love to eat, and whatever grass they don't eat vegetatively, we'll provide seed crops for them.
How much water did you figure you would use the sector on for irrigation?
I think I've calculated about 15,000 gallons to get through the summer. It's a little tricky. In initial years, we were trying to push our plants with as little water as possible to see how little we could get away with using. But they definitely suffered. They didn't grow lushly through the summer. So if we're trying to meet the food goal, then we need the lush production. We'll need to throw down more water. So it's a bit of a trade-off there. And water is cheap, so and food is relatively expensive, so it makes sense to put down more of it. That's what we would need storage-wise to irrigate through the summer during the dry months. Right now we're using 750 gallons a month when we're not watering the yard at all. So 25 gallons a day, pretty much, just for our domestic use. I would have to look at the bills from past years, but I think we go from basically 3 water units for a 3-month period up to usually about 7 or 8 in the summer, so maybe doubles or triples. So that would mean that we're up to maybe 70 gallons a day in the summertime when we're irrigating things. And that's on the low side when we were trying to push things. It's rough. I'm going to write up a blog post eventually that analyzes that better.
How do you get away with not having a sewer?
Well, we poop in a bucket, 5-gallon bucket with one of those camping portable snap-on things on it, toilet seats, and then we go dump it in the compost pile, and it gets hot, and so that kills off most of the pathogens. And then we also let it sit for a year when we're not adding any more human manure to it. We let it sit for a full year, and so the combination of heat and then the time, full year, is a safety precaution, kills off any pathogens. And then we spread it in areas where we're not going to be eating the crop soon anyway, and definitely not around leaf crop. It's more under fruit trees. So that's the way to deal with human manure safely. Makes a lot more sense than pooping in your drinking water, essentially.
The city doesn't give you a hassle about that?
No, a lawyer has looked into it in the city and says it's legal as long as you have a toilet that's connected to a sewer. That's all that the laws specifically dictate. They don't say anything about how you can't poop in a bucket and compost it. I don't know that anybody's pushed it, tried to make a case out of it to make sure it was legal, but nobody's had any hassles with it. And a doctor in town, Ole Earson, is a big proponent of this. He's looked at the health issues and is
Have you considered
confident.
Using a methane digester, anaerobic digester, to get, say, small amount of gas for cooking?
Right. I haven't really. It's definitely a potential idea. I haven't looked into it though. I know of the idea, but don't know any details really.
You're talking about nitrogen and urine?
So urine contains a lot of nitrogen. I guess the excess nitrogen passes out mostly in the urine in our bodies, and so I usually just pee directly outside try to rotate around the yard, and obviously not peeing on the plants that we're going to be picking and eating soon. And then Tulsi, my female partner, mostly pees in a bucket inside, and then we dilute that with water and spread it out in the yard, or dump it on wood chips before sheet mulching with them. So I have a blog post about it. I think one person can provide enough nitrogen for like 4,000 or 5,000 square feet of growing space. So, yeah.
Does the city know about your gray water?
No, they don't. The gray water we have set up is not legal, and they've been working on legalizing gray water in Oregon, but my impression is that it's still a highly over-engineered, kind of ridiculous system. So we have a diverter valve in there so that it can either go to gray water or down to the sewer. And as we're finishing our building inspection stuff, we'll probably just dismantle the gray water system and just have it go to the sewer for simplicity. Then hopefully, like the buyer, we assume that whoever wants to buy this place is not going to be afraid of gray water. But if they're getting a bank loan, then the bank inspection might be an issue. So, but we'll see how that goes.
And you said the place is
we're trying to finish the main construction project so it's not this crazy disaster zone when we're trying to show it to people. But basically in a month or two we're going to be opening it up to try to sell it. We're thinking around $200,000.
So you're really moving to Hawaii?
Yep, we're moving to Hawaii. We have maybe 1 or 2 other people we just met within the past few weeks who are really interested in coming with us. Our vision has always been a tight-knit tribe of people, like not just an intentional community, but really interdependent, almost like family. People who realize that as systems break down climate-wise and energy-wise and economic-wise, that we're really going to have to be supporting each other. So we're trying to form that kind of community. have a permaculture homestead where we can, in theory, if necessary, grow enough food to feed everybody in the community, which would be from 10 to 25 people, and be next to public land. We were originally looking at California and looking at national forests down there. In Hawaii, there are forest reserves, which are a similar idea. So then we'll be hunting and gathering in those, like hunting pigs in Hawaii, growing some food, and following whatever combination of subsistence patterns makes sense as conditions change. For learning basic information about plants, the Plants for a Future database is my first stop, pfaf.org. Doesn't really give you anything on polycultures. The book Perennial Vegetables by Eric Tonesmeyer gives really good species accounts of a lot of the perennial vegetables. Again, doesn't really touch much on polycultures, and a lot of the ones in that book I've tried here and they haven't succeeded. Doesn't mean that they couldn't work elsewhere in town. We definitely have more of a hands-off, sink or swim attitude with a lot of the plants. So some of them could probably work with more babying or just better attention up front establishing them. The best resource I know of is our yard right now. We don't have any other tours scheduled right now, but we may still do some more before we leave. I've been trying to dump as much information as I can into the community before we leave. So if you go to the Discount Permaculture website, you can see classes, and you can also drop me an email to get signed up for the mailing list to get announcements about it, or you can come give me your email after this. The site will exist. I don't expect to add much to it for quite some time because I don't like to post things like, we got chickens and they're cute. I like to post things like, this is really useful information I haven't seen anywhere else. So it'll take us a while after landing in Hawaii to get to the point where we have anything new to add. Probably I'll still be doing summaries of what I've learned here for a while, but there'll be a big gap somewhere in there.
Are you already exploring what science that you're going to try to use there?
I am.
Because you're going to go through enough lot of experience taking that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're trying to save some of the seeds here to take with us over there, and also I'm starting to read through the books, and I'm actually working on a tropical Plants for a Future database where I'm going through the books and doing data entry to have all the information on the tropical plants there. So that'll make it easier for me to reference it and share it, and other people will get that benefit. Plus, it's the best way I've found to get things into my head is just going through the books and writing things down or typing them in, and just sticks for me better that way. The Big Island on the wet side. Only place with reasonably affordable land and enough room to move around is the hunter-gatherer part of it. Ranges from like 60 to 200 inches a year in the areas we're looking at.
So have you met other people in Portland that are practicing self-sufficiency with the same degree as you are?
No, haven't met anybody else into it to this degree.
So what have you found?
In town, the Portland Permaculture Guild is a good networking resource. Definitely have friends there, people we enjoy chatting with about this stuff, and a lot of people who know a lot of things about different parts of it. There's the Portland Peak Oil Group. We haven't been involved in that for years now, and I think now it's a Transition Portland is the official name of it. They still have some good events and have some like book reading circles where they're reading Mycelium Running and other related books.
What about the dirt?
The dirt that Catherine mentioned. They have a really good calendar, good place to go to see all the events coming up. And I actually don't really go there much. We've been kind of reclusive the last couple of years while we're trying to get the house project done. So.
Bark chips, the chips you got, you lay those flat and fill their soil. And what did you worry about the kind of chips you get? You could get a lot of time and stuff that you got in the soil.
All right, two good questions. No, we don't till the chips in. We just put them at the soil surface the way nature does. Nature puts down organic debris at the surface, and then the whole soil food web eats it up and drags it down deeper down as desired. If you till wood chips into the soil, then you get the nitrogen locking issue that you might have heard about. And that basically happens because now you have all this carbon-rich stuff surrounded by all the soil, and the microbes that are trying to break down the wood take up all the nitrogen from the soil to build their bodies and multiply. And so that nitrogen is locked up and not available to plants for quite some time until the wood is done decomposing and the microbes die off because their habitat has died, and then their bodies re-release the nitrogen. So you don't want to dig wood chips or other woody stuff into the soil. We haven't been too particular about what kind of wood. The main thing is avoiding walnut wood and cedar. I think are two of the main allelopathic plants that have chemicals in them that inhibit the growth of other plants. Pine needles and the conifers are somewhat acidic, but we actually don't worry too much about soil pH. If you have enough organic matter, then the nutrients are going to be available, and the soil pH doesn't limit it too badly. Mostly, Tulsi doesn't like the conifers for the paths because then it means that I drag in all the needles with me into the house. Was there a question back there? Yep.
Are you glad to do this?
Oh yeah, definitely. This has been a great learning opportunity on a small scale. We got a little bit over our heads the first year trying to do the whole yarding, learning curve with bees and chickens and the fungus, which is a large part of why the mushroom logs died off because we just couldn't take care of everything. So probably if we had jumped into a larger property, we would have overextended ourselves and been pretty miserable. So this has been a really good scale to work on, and we've had really good neighbors. We don't feel the full sense of connection with the full level that we're trying to go to, but we have lots of neighbors who are into gardening and tool sharing and potlucks and all that stuff, so it's been a good place to do it. Yeah, right amount of space. So easy to get so many materials for free in the city, so that really facilitates doing a lot of this. No, we've done a fair amount of hand picking of slugs at night, especially when we had the chickens growing up as baby chicks. We'd pick 100 slugs or more in a night and feed it to them every day. And when they're little chicks in a cardboard box and they don't know any better, they'll eat the slugs. Once they get onto the real world and they discover so many better things, they just look at you and go. So the hand picking knocks them back temporarily, but it's definitely something that you just have to keep doing constantly. We've done the beer traps a little bit. It maybe helps a little bit, but again, something you'd have to keep doing. And yeah, I think basically it's just a matter of harnessing somebody who's going to come eat them. If you're in an area where you can support like frogs or amphibians or garter snakes or that kind of stuff, they also eat slugs. We have so many neighborhood cats around that I don't think any of those helpers would have a chance. No, go you first.
What did you initially buy your property for?
What did say that again?
The initial cost of your property?
$135,000. Yeah.
Give a quick analysis for solar working is if your name and email is back here on this list, make sure it's there before you go, and you will receive a link to the slideshow, and I'll make sure it's blocked.
Yeah.
As well. Our next three Goal Net Zero meetings are yet to be determined for June, July, and August. They will be determined soon, and so we'll send out notices about them as well.
And my blog, farmerscribe.blogspot.com, also has the presentation link. And I'm wearing these silly little wires here because I was actually audio recording this. I'm going to try to sync this up to the slideshow and make that available for people to hear this. You're welcome.